Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. This year, Thanksgiving would be spent with my wife's family. For nearly 20 years, we had always been the hosts, but with both of our sons now away at college, the tradition had shifted. Daniel had opted for Alabama, while Jeremy went with Auburn. Whether by chance or design, I suspected their choices had been made just to stoke a little friendly rivalry within the family. It was an ongoing source of amusement and debate during every holiday gathering. For 16 years, I had been stuck in a job I loathed, working as an insurance claims adjuster. The repetitive nature of the work drained me. I had always longed for a career that kept me active and outdoors, but financial responsibilities had kept me shackled to a desk. Aria, my wife, had never held a job, which made my role as the sole breadwinner all the more crucial. Our boys had always been involved in sports and extracurricular activities, and I threw myself into being an engaged father. Meanwhile, Aria seemed to drift further toward her parents, preferring to spend increasing amounts of time with them. They were still independent, but age had begun to take its toll. Although her parents had occasionally joined us for Thanksgiving, we had never spent the holiday at their place, until now. The plan was for a quiet, easygoing weekend. The weather was pleasant, and the 2-hour drive was uneventful. Once we arrived, Aria and her mother immersed themselves in the kitchen while her father and I caught up. With just the four of us, everything unfolded smoothly. Dinner was excellent, and the conversation remained light-hearted. Frank, my father-in-law, and I had been looking forward to a lazy afternoon of football and beer, while Teresa, my mother-in-law, seemed perfectly content with her latest James Patterson novel. "I think I'll spend the afternoon with Madison Allen," Aria announced suddenly. "I haven't seen her in over a decade." I glanced at her. "Are you sure you're good to drive?" She gave me a reassuring smile. "We'll be fine, don't worry. Just take it easy on the drinks, okay?" I laughed and waved her off. As Teresa wrapped up in the kitchen, I grabbed a couple of fresh beers for Frank and me. Frank took a long sip before asking, "So, where did Aria say she was headed?" "She's visiting Madison Allen," I replied. His expression shifted into something unreadable. "That's interesting. She'll probably be gone for a while." "She said she'd be back later tonight." The afternoon passed in slow monotony. Teresa remained lost in her book, and Frank and I feigned interest in the game playing on the screen. Eventually, Frank cleared his throat. "Tyrone, mind grabbing a couple of Black and Tans from the fridge? We need to talk." I returned with the beers, and by the time I sat down, he had quietly shut the door between the den and the living room. "What's on your mind?" I asked. He let out a measured breath. "Madison Allen passed away 6 months ago. Colon cancer." My brow furrowed. "What?" "I don't know why Aria told you she was meeting her. She could have come up with any other name." I sat back, my mind spinning. "Maybe it's just some inside joke between her and Teresa. They have their little secrets." Frank shook his head. "Something isn't right, Tyrone." I took a slow sip of my beer. "You think she's hiding something?" His silence was answer enough. Finally, he nodded. "This has been going on for the past 5 years. It's the reason she visits us so often." I narrowed my eyes. "Are you saying that when she comes here, she doesn't actually stay?" "Exactly. I have no idea where she goes, but I was told to stay out of it." "So Aria is lying to me and Teresa is covering for her?" Frank met my gaze. "You're a smart guy, Tyrone." We let the subject drop after that, pretending to care about the game. As time passed, Frank dozed off, and I found myself staring blankly at the television, my thoughts elsewhere. Pulling out my phone, I toggled through the settings. Aria had turned off location sharing. I tried to override it, but she had locked it down. I considered calling her but decided against it. I knew her phone was still on. I just wished I had the kind of tracking software they used in crime dramas. Instead, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. Frank was out cold, and Teresa quietly covered him with a blanket before heading to bed. Not long after, Aria returned. "So, how was Madison?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "She's doing great. They redecorated the whole house since the kids moved out. Looks beautiful." She exhaled. "I drank more wine than I should have. Probably shouldn't have driven back." I gave a slow nod. "I'm exhausted," she added. "I'm going to shower and head to bed. We can talk in the morning, okay?" I didn't reply. Instead, I sipped my coffee and quietly slipped her phone into my pocket. As I stepped outside, I heard Frank mumble in his sleep, "Go get him, Tiger." I had no idea what he meant, but it made me smile. With no clear plan, I sat in the car, waiting for the heater to kick in. On impulse, I checked the vehicle's GPS history. For the money I had spent on the system, I figured it should do more than just direct me to the nearest burger joint. Selecting the breadcrumbs feature, I watched as a neat line of red dots traced her movements for the day. 15 minutes later, I was parked outside a modest brick house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The GPS markers had led her here before heading back. A quick search on Google Maps confirmed the address, 321 David Drive. Curious, I looked deeper. The home belonged to David Flores, Aria's high school boyfriend. I vaguely recalled that he had been her date to senior prom, so she had spent the afternoon with an old flame. That alone wasn't proof of anything, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt. I considered driving home, but instinct told me to dig a little further. That's when I discovered she had made a stop before visiting David at a nearby CVS. Rummaging through the car, I searched for a receipt or a bag, but came up empty. Then I remembered, Aria never carried cash. She charged everything. Pulling up her phone, I accessed her MasterCard history. It worked like a charm. Her 3:45 p.m. purchase at Lakeshore CVS, Trojan Pleasure Pack for $8, and a tube of KY jelly for $10. 12 condoms. I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. Now I had my answer. Rather than confronting her immediately, I saved the receipt as an image. Then, after a bit of fumbling in her phone's settings, I set the picture as her wallpaper. The truth would greet her first thing in the morning. Now, whenever she unlocks her phone, it'll be the first thing she sees. She'll delete it quickly, no doubt, but not before realizing that I know exactly what she did. Just in case, I sent myself a copy. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway. Frank was still dozing in his recliner, completely unaware of my return. Upstairs, Teresa was likely asleep, and my ever-loyal wife was resting comfortably in the guest room. I moved quietly, gathering my belongings and bringing everything downstairs. On the kitchen table, I placed Aria's phone next to my wedding ring. No note. None was needed. As I stepped toward the door, I noticed my father-in-law standing in the doorway. "How'd it go, Tyrone?" he asked, his voice calm. "Exactly as you expected," I answered. He gave a small, knowing grin and waved as I passed by. 5 hours later, I was home. Another 5 hours, and I was heading south to Florida. No more miserable job. No more miserable weather. Most importantly, no more cheating wife. I thought about stopping to see the boys, but decided against it. Strangely, I didn't end up in Florida. Instead, I found myself in Baldwin County, Alabama. The place was littered with abandoned mobile homes, remnants of retirees who had passed away, leaving their families to deal with the financial burden. Many of these places sat empty for years before being sold. Plenty of rentals were available. Within a week, I had a new address, a fresh driver's license, and a newly opened bank account. I shut down all my Pennsylvania accounts and filed my declaration of domicile in Alabama. Then, I reached out to Alabama and Auburn universities to update the boys' residency status. Every cent was transferred out of my old accounts, including their college funds. Out of fairness, I cleared all outstanding balances on my credit cards before closing them. Aria still had her Kohl's card, though. I canceled the house and car insurance. Both the vehicle and phone were in her name anyway. I thought about shutting off the utilities but ultimately left them running. I wasn't hiding, just making sure there was nothing tying me back to that life. No need to bore you with the details. This isn't the first time you've heard a story like this. I called the boys and explained my decision as best as I could without sounding bitter. They weren't thrilled, didn't fully understand, but accepted it. I found work at Escambia Boat Works scraping hulls. They wouldn't pay under the table for insurance reasons, so I went legit. Not that it mattered. I wasn't running from anything. I'd broken no laws. For $10 a month, I got a Planet Fitness membership. Not for working out, just for access to a decent shower, since the trailer's bathroom barely functioned. After work, I'd shower, grab dinner from a local spot, or pick up takeout. It didn't take long to settle into a routine. Before I knew it, I was content. "Frank, it's me, Tyrone. Just checking in. How's everything?" "Hey man, good to hear from you. How long has it been now?" he asked. "Almost 4 months," I replied. "Damn, time flies. What have you been up to?" "Rented a trailer, got a job at a boatyard, lost nearly 20 pounds without trying. The boys are visiting for spring break, but I'm not looking forward to explaining everything to them. We'll see how that goes. Glad you're doing okay, man. Things fell apart over here. Have you heard from your wife?" "Frank, I haven't received a single message. Not one. I expected an avalanche of calls, but I got nothing. Just spam. What the hell is going on?" Frank chuckled. "You won't believe this. Aria and her mother actually celebrated for a full week after you left. First thing Teresa did was take down your wedding photo and put up an old picture of Aria and David from prom. Didn't even know she still had it. I expected some fallout," I admitted. "But not that. Guess they're happy now?" "Not exactly." When Aria got back home, reality smacked her in the face. She couldn't afford the bills, let alone the mortgage. It all spiraled fast. The house is going back to the bank next month. She's drowning in debt, couldn't even keep up with her Kohl's payments. So where's she staying now? She planned to move in with us, but at the last minute, she chose David instead. She's pissed about the accounts being closed, but not enough to reach out. David seems happy to foot the bill. Frank and I chatted a little longer before I promised to call again after the boys' visit. My feelings were mixed. Relief that I had left without trouble. A sting from the complete lack of remorse. Maybe I hadn't handled things the right way. The boys stayed a week but spent most of their time in Gulf Shores and Panama City Beach. They refused to talk about the divorce, only mentioning that Aria had called once to say I left, then never reached out again. They were relieved to hear I could still cover their tuition. I suggested they get Alabama driver's licenses and use my address. Socially, I kept to myself. No bars. The waitresses at my usual spots were either too young, too old, or too desperate. I eventually started working out. Not for any dramatic reason, just boredom. No exciting stories. The area was mostly retirees living off Social Security. I ended up addicted to YouTube videos. 2 years passed. No one ever knocked on my door, especially not on a Sunday morning. When the knocking wouldn't stop, I finally gave in just to shut them up. It was Frank. Damn, Frank. How the hell did you find me? Stopped by and saw Jeremy on the way down. He gave me directions. Couldn't track down Daniel. Got a cold beer for a weary traveler? It's 6 in the morning. How about coffee? You got some? He asked. I did, and I even had enough to put together a decent breakfast, one of my few indulgences. We ate and talked for a while before I finally asked the big question. So what the hell brings you here? Got myself into a bit of trouble. Figured it was time to leave the Keystone State. I didn't press him. Then he dropped the bombshell. Aria and David got married on Saturday. I stared at him. I didn't even know I was divorced. That was certainly an unexpected twist, though it hardly seemed like a valid reason to pack up and leave. While the rest of the town had gathered at the church, I used the distraction to set David's house ablaze. Now that was something worth talking about. How did that play out? I asked. Beats me, he said with a shrug. I wasn't about to hang around and watch. Well, since you're standing here now, I guess that means they'll have no choice but to move in with Teresa. Doubt that, Frank responded, noticing my puzzled look. Before I left, I made sure to burn my own house down too. Just as I was processing that bombshell, an unexpected arrival shook things up. Daniel and Jeremy showed up at the door. What brings you two here? I asked as Frank and I helped haul their bags inside. We've been trying to track down Grandpa, Daniel explained. Figured this was the most likely place he'd turn up. If I had to guess, I'd say he's headed to Mexico, Jeremy added. By the way, you guys made it to the wedding, right? Oh yeah, Daniel answered, grinning. It was definitely memorable. Though not in the way anyone expected, Jeremy added, barely keeping a straight face. Frank elbowed me lightly. Tyrone, I think these two are pulling our leg. I grabbed 4 beers from the fridge and handed them around. All right then, tell me, how do you feel about your new stepdad? Their laughter erupted immediately. What's so damn funny? I demanded. They never actually tied the knot, Daniel revealed. You're kidding, I said, stunned. Right in the middle of the ceremony, someone ran in yelling that David's house was on fire, Daniel explained. Naturally, everything came to a screeching halt as he took off to see for himself. Just as people started settling down again, news broke that Grandma and Grandpa's house had also gone up in flames. Mom tried to salvage the ceremony, but David lost it, called off the wedding entirely, and stormed off. Since we suddenly had no place to go, we decided to head straight here. So the wedding never even happened? I asked, needing it spelled out. Not even a little, Jeremy confirmed. Daniel and Jeremy stuck around for a few days before heading back to school. In the meantime, a few nosy folks came sniffing around, asking about Frank, but I sent them on a wild goose chase toward Ocala. Eventually, they stopped showing up altogether. Frank found a job at Home Depot, and life took on a new rhythm. Unlike me, he had a natural way with people, and before long, I got pulled into his growing social circle. Suddenly, we were hitting up cookouts, birthday parties, and weekend barbecues. Oddly enough, we even received invites to a funeral and a couple of weddings. That's how I crossed paths with Hazel Hammond. A divorcee working in Home Depot's garden department, alongside Frank, Hazel, and I, kept running into each other at different gatherings. It wasn't long before we clicked and started seeing each other. One thing led to another, and 6 months later, after Frank moved out to live with a wealthy widow in Orange Beach, Hazel moved into my trailer. Though we never made it official, we did buy the trailer together. Eventually, she convinced me to quit my job at the marina, and now we both work at Home Depot. Funny how love has a way of leading you to places you never saw coming. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Walking into the restaurant, an undeniable wave of anticipation settled over me. This evening wasn't ordinary. It was a celebration of 15 years of marriage, a milestone I had carefully orchestrated to honor. This was more than just a meal. It was about crafting an unforgettable experience. The venue was one she had mentioned countless times, a refined and sought-after destination famed for its sophistication and allure. Securing the reservation had been a challenge, but I had gone to great lengths to ensure everything was perfect. The atmosphere inside was magical. Soft, golden lighting bathed the room, delicate music floated gently through the air, and the faint clinking of glasses added an elegant rhythm. It felt as though the universe had conspired to create the ideal setting. Arriving early, I took time to confirm that every detail was just right. The table was immaculately arranged, featuring a centerpiece of fresh roses. Her favorite wine rested chilled in an ice bucket, and our seats offered the best view in the house. Tucked into my pocket was a small box containing a gift I'd spent weeks selecting, a dainty bracelet I knew she would adore. It was meant to be a surprise, a little sparkle to elevate the night even further. Yet as I waited, my initial excitement began to give way to a subtle unease. She was late, not fashionably late, but significantly so. The first 30 minutes passed, and I tried to remain optimistic. Perhaps traffic was heavier than expected, or perhaps work had kept her longer than usual. It wasn't in her nature to be this delayed. I sent a quick text. "Hey, everything okay? Can't wait to see you." The screen stayed quiet. Another 10 minutes ticked by, and the waiter approached, his smile polite but laced with curiosity. "Would you like to order something while you wait?" he inquired. I offered a nervous chuckle and declined, reassuring him she'd arrive shortly. Still, as I glanced at my phone, the lack of a response began to gnaw at me. I decided to call, but the line went straight to voicemail. Another 30 minutes crept by, and when the waiter returned, his demeanor was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Shall I hold the table a little longer?" he asked, his tone gentle. The pity in his eyes was unbearable. Forcing a strained smile, I nodded. My unease was no longer subtle. It had grown into a pressing worry. I tried calling again, letting the phone ring longer this time, but the result was the same. No answer. Around me, the restaurant's earlier buzz was beginning to fade as the evening progressed. I caught glimpses of diners glancing my way, their hushed conversations filled with quiet speculation. An hour passed, and my concern overtook the anticipation that had filled me earlier. My mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Was she stuck somewhere? Hurt? I typed another message. "Please let me know you're safe. I'm getting worried." This time, I didn't hide the distress in my words. Yet again, no reply came. By the time 2 hours had elapsed, the restaurant was nearly deserted, and the vibrant energy of earlier had dwindled to the sound of staff cleaning up. I stared at my phone, willing it to light up, but it stayed silent. Desperation clawed at me as I tried calling once more, each attempt more frantic than the last. When the waiter approached again, I didn't wait for him to speak. "Just bring me the check," I said, my voice flat. The table before me remained untouched, the wine unopened, the gift still in my pocket. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I pulled out my phone, praying for any sign of her. Finally, the screen lit up with an incoming call. Relief surged through me. She was reaching out. "Hey, are you okay? I've been trying to reach you all night," I said, my voice trembling with equal parts concern and relief. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to unsettle me. When she finally spoke, her tone was hurried and detached. "Oh, hey, I'm so sorry. I got caught up. I'm running late," she said casually, offering no substantial explanation. Something about her voice felt off. It was distant, almost rehearsed. In the background, faint noises reached my ears, muffled laughter, the clink of a glass, and then a man's voice, low and unmistakable. My stomach churned. "Where are you?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady despite the rising dread. The silence on her end stretched longer this time. When she answered, her words felt mechanical, devoid of sincerity. "I'm still at the office. A last-minute project came up. I couldn't leave," she said. Her explanation didn't align with the sounds I'd heard. It was nearly 11 p.m., and the inconsistencies gnawed at me. "You're still at work?" I asked, my disbelief creeping into my voice. Her response came sharp and defensive. "Yes. Look, I can't talk right now. I'll see you at home, okay?" Before I could press further, the line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, replaying the conversation. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the unfamiliar voice, they all painted a picture I didn't want to believe. Deep down, I knew the truth, but denial held me in its grip. On impulse, I opened the GPS app on my phone. Months ago, we had enabled location sharing for safety during her late-night shifts. I had never felt the need to use it until now. My hands shook as I pulled up her location. The map loaded slowly, each second agonizing. When it finally appeared, my heart sank. She wasn't at her office. The blinking dot showed her across town at a small motel I instantly recognized. A wave of nausea hit me, and I leaned against a wall for support. My worst fears were unfolding before me, undeniable and stark. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the screen, hoping for a different outcome. But there was no mistaking the truth. Shock quickly turned to anger. If she was lying, if my fears of betrayal were real, I needed to see it with my own eyes. My resolve hardened. I dialed her number one last time, but this time it went straight to voicemail. She wasn't even pretending anymore. Determined, I slipped my phone into my pocket and headed for my car. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, I drove with the motel's address glaring at me from the GPS. Every red light felt like an insult, every slow car an unbearable obstacle. My thoughts raced, each one darker than the last. When I finally reached the motel, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place with brutal clarity. My emotions churned in a storm of pain, disbelief, and fury. But one thing was certain. I was going to confront the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Each time I tried to reason with myself, her hurried voice and the faint sound of someone speaking in the background played on repeat in my mind, like an inescapable tune. By the time my car pulled into the cramped motel parking lot, my heart was pounding so loudly it felt as if it were reverberating in my ears. The motel was just as dreary as I had envisioned, dimly lit, with walls bearing cracked and peeling paint, and a neon vacancy sign that flickered as though it might fail at any moment. This wasn't a place anyone stumbled upon accidentally, let alone mistook for a workplace. The truth loomed large and heavy, settling over me like an unbearable weight. I parked a few spaces away from her car, instantly recognizing it. There it was, out in the open. She hadn't even tried to hide it, hadn't bothered to park in a spot that might appear less conspicuous. My hand gripped my phone tightly as I stared at her vehicle, as though it could somehow provide answers I already feared. Part of me wanted to storm inside and demand an explanation, but another part wavered, uncertain if I was ready to confront the reality waiting for me. Once I crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. Whatever I found inside would irrevocably change everything. Taking a deep breath, I reopened the location-sharing app to confirm what I already knew. The glowing pin on the map left no room for doubt. She was in there. My thumb hesitated before instinctively switching the camera on my phone to video mode. If I was going to face this, I needed undeniable proof. Evidence of what she'd done, proof of the suspicions that had gnawed at me all night. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting against my skin, failing to quell the fire of anger and betrayal burning inside me. Each step toward the motel felt heavier, like trudging through thick mud. My eyes scanned the parked cars, trying to identify which one might belong to him. The thought twisted my stomach, but I forced it down. I had one objective: to find her. The hallway leading to the rooms reeked of dampness, tinged with the faint smell of mildew and something that felt like despair. My heart pounded furiously as I passed door after door, the numbers blurring together until I arrived at it. Room 216. From inside, muffled voices reached my ears. Hers, unmistakably, high-pitched and hurried. His, deeper and casual, as though this were an ordinary evening. My steps faltered, and for a brief moment, I stood frozen. This was the moment. The one where everything I thought I knew about my life would either be confirmed or somehow disproven. I pressed record on my phone, lifting it slightly as I steadied myself, and knocked firmly on the door. A pause followed. The voices fell silent. Footsteps approached from inside. A hushed whisper. The door cracked open, and there she was, her face pale with shock and fear. She looked like a teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. Her hair was tousled, and her blouse was rumpled in ways that said more than words ever could. What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice trembling as her eyes darted behind her, searching for an escape. Before she could shut the door, I pushed it open wider, just enough to glimpse him. A man stood there, shirtless, frozen, mid-action. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing down on us as we all stood motionless. I raised my phone slightly, keeping the camera trained on both of them. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, but sharp as a blade. "So, this is what working late looks like?" She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The guilt etched across her face said everything. As she scrambled for words, the storm of emotions inside me hardened into a single, resolute determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. I stepped fully into the room, the stale air heavy with tension. She backed away slightly, her face drained of color, her hands fidgeting nervously. The man, now standing awkwardly by the bed, looked like a deer caught in headlights, unsure whether to speak, flee, or disappear entirely. "Are either of you going to say something?" I asked, my tone flat and unyielding. My phone stayed steady as I panned the camera between them, capturing every detail: the disheveled bed, the half-empty wine bottle on the nightstand, his shoes carelessly tossed in a corner. "It's not what it looks like," she finally managed, her voice cracking. The words were hollow, meaningless. "Not what it looks like?" I repeated, gesturing around the room. "Then what does it look like? Please, enlighten me." The man, younger than I expected, probably in his late 20s, shifted uneasily, glancing at her for some kind of guidance. He looked as though he wanted to apologize but lacked the courage. I turned to him, my voice icy. "You should leave." He hesitated, looking to her as if waiting for permission, but she remained silent. "Now," I added, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Without a word, he grabbed his belongings, shirt, shoes, and what little dignity he had left, and slipped out the door, avoiding my gaze. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving just the two of us in the suffocating stillness. She crossed her arms tightly, as though trying to shield herself from the harsh reality of what had just happened. Tears welled in her eyes, but they stirred no sympathy in me. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady but laden with restrained fury. "How long has this been going on?" Her face was a mix of guilt and desperation. It wasn't," she began, but her voice faltered. She took a shaky breath. "It just happened. I didn't plan this." "Didn't plan this?" I scoffed, bitterness seeping into my words. "You expect me to believe that? This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't look like this." I gestured to the room again, my voice rising slightly. "This was a choice you made, over and over again." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away sharply, her touch stinging like a slap. "Please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Explain?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You had all night to explain, but you ignored me. You lied to me. And now you want to explain?" I held up my phone, still recording. "This," I said, showing her the screen, "is the truth, and now everyone will see it." Her eyes widened in panic, and she lunged for the phone, but I stepped back. "Don't," I warned. "This is what you did. You don't get to rewrite the story." She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably, but her tears left me unmoved. The woman I had loved and trusted was gone, replaced by a stranger. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her to face the wreckage she had created. As I reached my car, I realized my hand was still clutching the phone, its weight a stark reminder of the truth it now held. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the screen, replaying the video. Each second was a brutal confirmation of her betrayal. For a moment, I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the share button. Anger and heartbreak battled within me. But in that moment, all I wanted was for the truth to be undeniable. In that instant, all I longed for was for someone to see what I had endured, to truly grasp it. Her family was the first to cross my mind. They had always embraced me wholeheartedly, treating me as though I was one of their own. Her parents, her siblings, each had welcomed me with open hearts, and I knew this truth would devastate them as deeply as it had shattered me. Without pausing to second-guess myself, I hit send. The video went to the family group chat. No preamble, no explanation. Just the raw footage, as if to say, here it is. This is the reality of who she is. My breath caught as I saw the message marked as delivered. For a moment, there was nothing. No responses, no reactions. The quiet was suffocating. Doubts began to creep in. Had I gone too far? Then, one by one, notifications began to roll in, a relentless flood that felt overwhelming. Her mother replied first. What am I looking at? Even through the sterile medium of text, her shock was palpable. Then her sister followed. Oh my God, is this real? Please tell me it's not. Her father, always a man of few words, kept it brief. Call me. The messages poured in, urgent and chaotic. Some were addressed to her, demanding an explanation. Others reached out to me, expressing sorrow for what I had endured and disbelief at her actions. The family dynamic shifted in an instant. She wasn't just my wife anymore. She was their daughter, their sister, and someone who had betrayed them all. I noticed the familiar typing indicator, those 3 dots dancing on the screen, but no message from her came through. Maybe she didn't know what to say, or perhaps she understood that there was nothing she could say. Her silence added to the storm. Of all the responses, her brothers stood out the most. I can't believe she's capable of this. We've got your back, man. Always. There was a bittersweet comfort in knowing they weren't excusing her behavior, weren't trying to shield her from accountability. By the time I returned home, the chat had become a battlefield of accusations, questions, and emotions. I stayed out of the fray, scrolling silently as her world unraveled in real time. Then, her car pulled into the driveway, and the weight of what I had unleashed truly sank in. She burst into the house, her face flushed with anger, clutching her phone as though it were a lifeline. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fear and fury. I didn't flinch, nor did I raise my voice. I met her gaze evenly and replied, "I told the truth." Her lips parted, ready to argue, to plead, to say whatever she thought might salvage the situation. But I was beyond caring. The damage was done, and for the first time in a long while, I felt in control. Her phone buzzed again, its vibrations slicing through the charged silence between us, likely another message from the group chat. She glanced at the screen, her defiance crumbling into despair. For a fleeting moment, I felt vindicated. This was her doing. Now, she had to face it. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. For the first time in years, I didn't wake to the familiar sounds of her morning routine. No coffee brewing, no footsteps hurrying to prepare for the day. Instead, there was an unnatural stillness, both liberating and disorienting. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone as messages from the group chat continued to pour in, many unanswered. Some called her out directly, demanding accountability, while others offered me words of support and validation. She hadn't come to bed. At some point, she must have taken a blanket and settled on the couch, or maybe she hadn't slept at all. I didn't check. I didn't care. Occasionally, I heard her footsteps in the hallway, hesitating near the kitchen before retreating. She didn't approach me, and I made no effort to seek her out. Mid-morning, I finally broke my silence, not with her, but with her father, who had left a voicemail asking how I was holding up. "I'm getting through it," I said, though I wasn't sure if it was true. Thanks for checking in. It means a lot. His voice on the line was steady, but heavy with sorrow. We're heartbroken, he admitted softly. This isn't the daughter we raised. That conversation was painful. I respected her father deeply, and hearing the regret in his voice was almost too much to bear. He asked about my plans, whether I could find it in me to forgive her, or if I intended to leave. For the first time, I allowed myself to say it aloud. I don't think I can stay. The words solidified a truth I'd been avoiding. There was no salvaging what had been broken. After hanging up, I went to the bedroom and retrieved a suitcase, not because I didn't have a right to be there, but because I no longer wanted to stay. As I packed my clothes methodically, she appeared in the doorway. So that's it? She asked, her voice unsteady. You're leaving? I stopped and turned toward her, really looking at her for the first time in what felt like forever. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked like a stranger. You left first, I said evenly. I'm just following your lead. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. I never wanted this, she murmured. I was selfish. I made a mistake. Please, let me explain. Let me fix it. You can't fix this, I replied, the words surprisingly easy to say. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I zipped the suitcase and slung it over my shoulder. She didn't try to stop me as I walked past her, though I could hear her soft sobs trailing behind. At the door, I paused, not because I doubted my decision, but because I realized there was one last thing I needed to say. Turning to face her, I spoke with calm finality. I loved you, I said. I would have done anything for you. But now, I don't even know who you are, and I don't want to. Her cries grew louder as I closed the door behind me. Standing on the porch, I breathed deeply, the cool air grounding me. The weight of the past few days hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, it felt manageable. I got into my car and started driving. I didn't know where I was headed, but that didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was steering my own life again, and for now, that was enough. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.